And let's go ahead, take out our Bibles at this time. Turn to Judges chapter 7. Judges 7. As Mary Beth was singing, I was thinking about that idea of what a good shepherd that God is. And I was thinking of Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And when we truly get an understanding of that, we truly grasp the idea that God is our shepherd. He leads us along. He never forsakes us. And what is our response to that? God, I love you. I just love you. And that's what she's saying. Just, oh, how I love you. You are my shepherd. You will not forsake me. You will not leave me alone. You guide me. You pick me up when I stumble. I just love you. And that should be the cry of our hearts, that we just love the Lord when we truly understand how good He is. Well, it is, as I said, so good to see you guys today. So good to be able to preach to people in the room. This is awesome. It's good to be able to get back into the book of Judges with you. We've been in it the last couple of weeks online, but it's just not the same. And so it's good to jump back in this week with everyone here. And as I was thinking about this, I was actually thinking about this passage a few weeks ago. And I was thinking about something that came to mind was, it was a movie back in 2007 came out. And this is one of those situations when I mention a movie, this is not an endorsement. It's just a statement that there was this movie. But there was a movie that came out back in 2007. And the title of the movie was simply 300. Now, 300, the movie, was a fictionalized retelling of an actual historical event. See, back in around 480 BC, the Persians were attacking the Greeks. This was in the Persian War. And there was a battle called the Battle of Thermopylae. And in this battle, it's been estimated, some accounts say that the Persians came with 1 million-man army to attack the Greeks at this area called Thermopylae. Now, Thermopylae was this narrow pass on the coast of Greece, and it's where the Persians decided to make their landing. The Greeks, of course, came out to defend the area, but they were severely outnumbered. Again, some estimates say the Persians came with 1 million. More conservative estimates say it was like 100,000 to 150,000. I know that's a big difference, but still the Greeks were severely outnumbered. Because the Greek citizens and the Greek army, the different ones they were able to cobble together, came to defend Greece there at Thermopylae, and they came with about 7,000 people. So if you come with 7,000 and the other people have 1 million, you realize you're in trouble. If you come with 7,000 and the others come with 100,000, you're still in trouble. And so this battle, it did not last for very long. What actually ended up happening, that 2 days the Greeks were able to withstand the Persian advances because it was this narrow area. If we thought about it like our sanctuary here and say the only way to get to the platform was this center aisle here. What the Greeks did was they crowded into that center area, that pass, like I say, the center aisle. And so the Persians could not come because the Greeks had this blocked up and were fighting valiantly in this pass. And for 2 days they withstood this massive army of Persians. But then something happened. There was a local resident, a Greek, who betrayed the Greeks. And he went to the Persians and told them there's actually this little trail that shepherds use, and they bypass Thermopylae. They bypass this narrow opening. If you go through this path, you'll be able to circle around behind the Greeks. And that's what the Persians did. As it became evident what was happening, the Greek army was led by a man by the name of King Leonidas. He was of Sparta. And King Leonidas recognized what was happening, and so he dismissed the majority of the Greeks, those 7,000 people. Most of them, he said, go back. Just go back home, go back, try to get reinforcement, just go away. But Leonidas kept just a small band of people there with him. And the movie, again, it fictionalized and it dramatized this. It made it look like it was just the 300 Spartans. There were others there, but the 300 Spartans did make up the bulk of the fighting capability of this small band that Leonidas kept back. And King Leonidas stayed with them also. And these 300, they were committed to fight to the death to defend Greece. And that's exactly what they did. They fought to the death. They withstood many of the Persians. They took many of the Persians out with them, but eventually they succumbed to the numbers And these 300 Spartans gave their lives, and bravely gave their lives to try to defend Greece. Now, why the Greek history lesson this morning? Why the Battle of Thermopylae? Why reference the movie 300? Well, it's because this morning, as we continue in our study in the book of Judges, we're going to see another similar situation play out. There's going to be an army that has a very, very small, very minuscule number of people. There's going to be another army that is, the Bible says they were without number. They were like the sands of the sea. They were like grasshoppers. Different terminology that just means that whoever was looking at the crowd said there's no point even counting. There's that many of them. There are so many out there. So you had this one small group of fighters, small group of soldiers versus this massive army, this massive military presence. When we think about the Greek 300, though, the Spartans, we read a story of bravery. We read a story of great courage and just this wonderful story about these guys that were willing to lay down their lives. But ultimately, it's a story of defeat. They lost. Now, history will tell us that Greece rallied around what happened there and came back from it, but that didn't happen with the 300. The story we're going to look at today, though, it's different. Because the story we're going to look at today, while it was another 300 people, the difference, they had God on their side. And so the outcome was quite different. It's a story that's really familiar. If you've read the Bible, if you've studied the Judges, if you're familiar with Gideon, you know about the story of the 300. And so this morning I want us to look at not 300, I'm talking about the Spartans, but I want us to look at the original 300. We're going to go back even further. See, 480 BC is when the 300 Spartans stood against the Persians, but we're going to go back about 800 years before that, and we're going to look at the original 300. The last couple weeks, we've been looking at the life of this man by the name of Gideon. A couple weeks back, again, both of those were services where we were online, but a couple weeks back, we were introduced to this man named Gideon. You'll recall that when we first see Gideon, he is down in a wine press threshing wheat. It's not where you would thresh wheat. If you were to thresh wheat, you were up on a hillside. There was a flat area, a hard area, whether it were rock or just ground that had been stomped over to make it smooth, make it hard. And so you would go up onto this hill area, and anyone from seeing from a distance would know what you were doing. You would either have oxen there or you would have sticks and you would be threshing the wheat and people could see from a distance. Now, a wine press was different. It was down in the ground. It was closer to home. From a distance, you probably couldn't even see somebody who was in a wine press. And that's where Gideon was. And the Bible says that he was down in the wine press for fear of the Midianites. Now, the Midianites just happened to be the latest group of people that had persecuted Israel. As we've studied Judges, we've seen time and time again, Israel rebelled against God. They sinned against God. And God would send a group of people to punish them, to persecute them. And with the Midianites, we read in Judges chapter 6 that for 7 years, the Midianites tormented Israel. If they planted something, as soon as it would come up, after they had done all the work, after they had pulled the weeds and they had done everything needed, as soon as it was harvest time, the Midianites would come in and take everything. And whatever they decided not to take, they would just destroy. So Israel was left with nothing. If Israel had cattle, the Midianites would come in and they would steal those. And so this is what's been happening for 7 years. So Israel had been tormented for 7 years at the hand of the Midianites. Then Gideon is down in this wine press threshing wheat. And the angel of the Lord shows up to Gideon. And I told you a couple weeks ago how this is just a humorous idea. Whenever I think about this guy who was in fear, hiding in a wine press, doing what he should have been doing out in the open, but he's in fear of the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord shows up to him and he says, "The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor." Is that a picture of a mighty man of valor there? Now, if you've ever seen the movie 300, again, I'm not endorsing it. It's a very violent movie. If you've ever seen pictures of Spartans, I mean, these guys were ripped and they had the weaponry and they were just bad dudes. You would look at them and say, now that is a mighty man of valor. They were out there ready to fight, looking for a fight. Who can we fight? When can we fight? Let's just fight. They just wanted to fight. You would look at that and say, mighty man of valor. The guy that's hiding in a hole in the ground, the guy that's poking his head up, make sure no one's looking, that is not the guy you look and say, that is a mighty man of valor. That guy right there is the one that we need to put all of our hopes on, because he will lead us. But yet, remember we said a couple weeks ago, God knows where you are, God knows who you are, and God knows what you're supposed to do. And so while Gideon may not have thought of himself as a mighty man of valor, God knew, I've got a call on your life, and when you give into that call, you're going to do great things. And listen, that's true for all of us. God has a plan for every one of us. Now maybe your plan, God's plan for you is not to lead an army into battle. All right, I'm pretty sure for most of us that is not God's plan. But God still has a plan for each of us. Whether that's to be a witness to your family, whether that's to be a witness at work or at school, or whether it's to surrender to a life of ministry, whatever it is, God has a plan for each of us. And He had a plan for Gideon. And we saw that as we first were introduced to him, how the angel of the Lord said, thou mighty man of valor. And then just a couple verses later, the Lord said to Gideon, go in this thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee? The very ones you're hiding from right now, I'm going to use you to deliver Israel from here in the near future. Again, Gideon, just think how you would have responded. You say, what now? I said a couple weeks ago, he might have said, I think you have the wrong wine press. Check the one down the road. That guy's pretty tough. Maybe he's in the wine press right now. You should go check on him, because I'm not a mighty man of valor. I can't do what you're saying I can do. And that's so many times what we do. That's so many times what we say, I can't, God. I hear what you're saying, but I can't. And listen, God's answer to him, God's answer to us is always the same. I'll go with you. Have not I sent thee. Listen, if God is sending us, then there's no way that we can lose. We have to go in His might. Well, as we continued reading Judges 6, we got to the end. We looked at this last week, how Gideon had surrendered. He said, okay, God, you obviously, this is you've called me, I'll do what you say. And there's a series of things that happened there in Judges 6, but then we get to the end. And Gideon had sent out messengers and letters, and he had said, hey, any of these tribes that are in the area, send anybody you can that can fight. And so we see towards the end of Judges 6 that this group has come to him, and we'll talk more about that group in a second and see what the size was. But the people are starting to come. And one more time, Gideon said, God, I just want to be sure. And I said last week, it's okay to ask God questions. There ain't a question you can ask that God's going to say, I don't know. Man, you got me stumped. I don't know. I don't know that I could answer that question. No one's ever asked me anything like that. No, listen, God can handle your questions. And so Gideon comes to him and says, God, are you sure? Are you sure I'm the one? Are you sure we'll have victory? Are you sure this is the army? Are you sure? And he says, God, I just need to know. Because I look out there's a whole lot of them. And we are severely outnumbered. God, I just want to make sure. It's okay to ask God questions. And so that's where we left off last week. And we see that after God gave him the answer, I read you just Judges 7:1 last week. Well, okay, God, you said yes. And so he took his army, this group of people that had come to fight. He said, all right, we're going to go. And they set up their tents and they were ready to go to battle. So he heard the answer from God, and then he obeyed. He said, all right, God said yes, so I'm going to keep moving, just like we all should do. Now let's pick up in Judges chapter 7 so we can see the original 300. And the title itself is a bit of a spoiler if you're not familiar with the story, but we're going to get there here in just a second. Judges chapter 7. We're going to go ahead and begin reading in verse number 1. We'll read a few verses and then we'll make some comments and then we'll come back again. Judges chapter 7 verse 1, then Jerubbaal, which is Gideon, and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well of Herod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand hath saved me. Now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people are yet too many. Bring them down unto the water, and I will try them for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And of whomsoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So he brought down the people unto the water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, everyone that lappeth of the water with his tongue, as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise, everyone that boweth down upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, by the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go, every man unto his place. So the people took victuals in their hands and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man into his tent, and retained these 300 men. And the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. As we get started looking at the original 300, we see here first God's directions to Gideon. God's directions to Gideon. Gideon, you got this far. Now let me tell you the next step. You see, God doesn't always give us all the plan in advance. Can you imagine Gideon in the winepress and God says, thou mighty man of valor, you're going to deliver Israel from the hands of the Midianites. I'm going to go with you, and 300 people. What would Gideon's response have been in the winepress if he knew he were about to go to battle against the Midianites with 300 people? Good chance he would have said, go to the next winepress for sure. You definitely got the wrong place. It's not me. It's somebody else. God doesn't always tell us everything in advance. And that's what walking by faith means. And so Gideon did not know when he said, God, are you sure? And God said, yes, I'm sure. And he took his army down into it says, the well, by the well of Herod. He didn't know when he took his army that that is not the army he was going to be going to battle with. Because God only revealed what Gideon needed to know as Gideon needed to know it. And so the directions that he gives Gideon, hey Gideon, you got this far. Now it's time for the next step. I want you to think about this as we'll read here in a few moments. It says that the host of Midian, as I've already said, were like grasshoppers. They were like sand of the sea. They were without number. There were so many that the person recording this said it doesn't even make sense to try to count them all. There's that many out there. Now, the person recording this did count the Israelites. So obviously, and we'll see that the number of the Israelites were 32,000. So obviously, whatever amount of Midianites there were a lot more than 32,000 because they took the time to count out 32,000. If you're going to count that many, then it couldn't have been 50,000 because that's not much more to count, or 100,000. No telling how many there were of the Midianites, but it was too many to count. So if you're going to battle against an army that is too numerous to count, what do you want on your side? An army that is too numerous to count, right? I mean, maybe that's just me. Maybe you're saying, nah, just send me and a couple bubbas with me and we'll be good. No, me, I'm like, hey, if I'm going up against an army that's too many to count, then I want an army that's too many to count. And if I don't have an army that's too many to count, then I at least want the best weapons and the best equipment. Like you would expect, okay, if Gideon doesn't have that big of an army, then at least God will give him some jets, some tanks, some rocket launchers. God will give him the best equipment. That's what you would expect, right? But instead, something happens that we would not anticipate. You see, if we didn't know the story, we would look at this and say, whoa! What just happened? And perhaps this is the first time some of you have heard this story, so this might be a bit of a shock. But God looks at what Gideon has, and we find out that it's 32,000. See, Gideon had sent out messengers to the tribes that were in the area. He had sent out messengers, and we saw that towards the end of chapter 6. He says, verse 35 of chapter 6, he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who was also gathered after him. And he sent messengers unto Asher and to Zebulun and to Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. So these tribes of Israel responded. They were the ones in the area. He wasn't writing to Judah. Judah was way south. It was the ones that were in the area. He wrote to them and they responded. He said, I need people to fight. Who's willing to fight against the Midianites with me? And 32,000 men said, I'll do it. I'll go up to fight. And then God said, awesome, you got 32,000. That's too many. Can you imagine There's an army that's too numerous to count, and you have 32,000. You are vastly outnumbered. And God said, that's too many. Like you would expect God to say, that's not enough. You need more. Send out more messengers. Send to the other tribes. These tribes responded. Get some of the others to respond. You might would expect God to say, Gideon, I've got good news for you. There's actually one of the nations that neighbor you that are not part of the Midianites' assembly. They are not one of their allies. They actually hate the Midianites, and they are willing to fight for you. So call them up, and they'll send more, and then y'all with their army can go up against the Midianites. Like that's what you would think. God's going to He's going to deliver in this awesome way and bring this massive army together that no one could imagine would be brought together. That's not what God does. God says you have too many. Why? He says there in verse 2, the people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, my own hand hath saved me. You see, if he went up with 32,000, even though they were vastly outnumbered, God knew what would happen if they ended up getting the victory. Rather than saying, God delivered the victory, God gave us the victory, they would say, do you see what we did? There were only 32,000 of us. Oh yeah, we bad. Yeah, who's next? Come on. And so God knew, if I let you go with 32,000, you're going to think you did it. And I can't have that. We see what happens when pride comes into the heart of Israel. You sin against me, so I can't let you get the victory. I have to get the victory. There's too many. And so the first thing that God says in order to whittle down his 32,000, he says, go ask them a question. Who's scared? Is there anybody here who is afraid and would like to be back at home right now? Perhaps of the 32,000, I mean, they all knew they were signing up to fight. He didn't say, hey, we're having a big party. Anyone want to come? And 32,000 showed up. He sent messengers, said, we're going to fight the Midianites. They knew that was going to happen, but maybe they hadn't seen the Midianites yet. Maybe they didn't know that they were too many to count. And so they said, you know what? I'm sick of these Midianites. Tired of the way they treat us. I'm tired of the way they steal our crops and our cattle, and I'm tired of what they do to us. I'm tired that I got to live in a cave now because they've run us out of our homes. I'm sick of this. You need someone to fight? I'll fight. I'm tired of it. Let's go right now. And so 32,000 men come and said, let's do this thing. And then he took them into the battlefield. And then they looked across. And fear crept in. Because God said, ask if anyone's afraid, and if they are, just tell them to go home. 32,000 men responded and said, we will fight. And Gideon said, is there anybody afraid? 22,000 said, yeah, me. Gideon said, going home. 32,000 showed up to fight, and 22,000 of them said, I'm too scared to fight, and so they went home. So now Gideon has less than a third of the army he came with. He came with 32,000, and now he's left with 10,000. Okay, God, you made your point. Can we go fight now? And God said, there's still too many. Can you imagine being Gideon? Oh, are you sure, God? I got a fleece. I don't mind putting it out again. There's too many? Still? You left me with a third of the people that responded. And God says, there's too many. Here's another test. Here's another way that you will whittle this down some more. He says, have them go to this body of water and get a drink. And there'll be some that they won't go all the way down to the water. Rather, they'll scoop up a handful and they'll bring it to their mouths and they'll lap the water out of their hand. Then there'll be the others that they'll go down on both knees and they'll just go straight down into the water and just bring up both hands to their face, and they'll just be drinking out of the water that way. God said, keep the ones that reach in with one hand. Now, from a strategic standpoint, I mean, if you think about this, he said, keep the ones that they go down, they're still aware of everything that's going on. They're still a hand free. If they need to grab a sword or something, they're going down there getting a handful of water, but they can still see. All the others, they're going face first in the water. They're not even paying attention. They're just getting a drink. He said, keep the ones that bring the hand to their mouth. Get rid of the others. And what's the magic number that he's left with? 300 men. 300. God said, there's too many at 32,000. There's too many at 10,000. And at 300, God said, I can use that. 300 is just right. Now, here's the thing. I don't want to tell a story, tell a history lesson, and not make any kind of application. So there'll be application throughout the message. The first thing I want you to think about is there may be a huge task that God has put in front of you. There may be a call in your life that you feel like God has placed on you, something He has called you to, and you say, it's too big. I can't do it. I'm not equipped to handle this task, God. Are you sure? How are you going to deliver? Are you going to send me more than I have now? And God may be calling you to do something, and He's saying, hey, just use what I've given you. God, I don't have enough. Use what I've given you. But God, I'm not able. Use what I've given you. Listen, it may be that God will call you to do something big with something small so that He gets the glory when you accomplish it. Because you see, if Gideon had gone out with 32,000, that is a small army compared to the other, but it's not nothing. 32,000. They could have done some damage with that. They could have got the victory, but God said, if you do, you'll think you did it. 10,000. It's only a third. God says, still too many, because there's a chance that you could pull off the upset. But at 300, there's no way Israel's going to say, look what we did. They know there is nothing that we could do with 300 to battle an army that is without number. There is no way. And listen, whenever God puts a call on your life, calls you to do something, no matter how big it is and no matter how little you feel, God will equip you with just what you need so that He can get the glory. And so God's direction for Gideon, just take 300. And so we see that there in the first 8 verses, God's directions for Gideon. But then what I see as I continue to read, I see Gideon's dependence on God, which is exactly what God wanted. God wanted Gideon and Israel, depend on me. Trust in me. Don't trust in your own power. Don't trust in your own skill. Don't trust in your own plans. Trust me. And so we see Gideon's dependence on God. No way could Gideon, regardless of what power he may have had, no matter what military prowess he might have had, which he didn't. He was just in a wine press not too long ago, hiding from the Midianites. But God had a plan for him, and Gideon was dependent on God. In Judges 7:2, we see, again, this was God's plan, because in Judges 7:2, He said, the people are too many, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand has saved me. In Judges 7:7, the Lord said unto Gideon, by the 300 men that lapped will I save you and deliver the Midianites. See, God's plan all along was, trust me, depend on me, do what I tell you to. I've got this under control. 32,000 is too many, you'll think you did it. 300 is just right, because there's no way that you did it. It's all because of me. And so we see that that's what Gideon grabbed onto. Gideon understood that God had set up a scenario that the only way Israel could succeed is if God was with them. And Gideon accepted that. Let's read the next few verses of what God does, again, to confirm to Gideon. We don't see that this time Gideon stopped and laid out a fleece. We don't see that Gideon stopped and said, are you sure, God? Because 300 is crazy. We don't see any of that, but God still said, hey, I want you to know. Gideon, I know this seems crazy. Gideon, I know it seems like it's not enough, but trust me. And just to help you out, I'm going to set up a little demonstration for you. And we see that in the next few verses, beginning verse 9. And it came to pass the same night, so after God had whittled it down to 300, the same night the Lord said unto him, to Gideon, arise, get thee down into the host, for I have delivered it into thine hand. But if thou fear to go down, go with Phurah, thy servant, down to the host. So God says, hey, Gideon, I want you to go down into the Midianites. Now, if you're the captain of the enemy, you don't want to walk into the camp of this limitless army. If you're the captain of Israel, you don't want to go into the Midianite camp. Like, guys, how's it going? Hey, we're getting ready to do battle here in a few days. I just want to stop in and say, hey, how y'all doing? Before a boxing match or something, they bump gloves. You don't want to do that. You're not in there like, all right, let's have a good clean fight, everybody. We're going to go to our corner, you go to your corner. As soon as the whistle blows or bell rings or whatever happens, we're just going to come out swinging. You wouldn't want to be there. You don't want to be in the midst of the enemy. But God said, hey, Gideon, I want you to go down into the camp of the Midianites. And he says, and Gideon, I understand that's going to be a little stressful. I understand you might be a little fearful. Take your assistant with you. I understand. He says, if you're scared, take Phurah with you. Verse 11, he says, and thou shalt hear what they say, and afterward shall thine hands be strengthened to go down into the host. Then went he down with Phurah, his servant. Well, I think that's a couple things come to mind. One, hey, Gideon was being honest. God said, hey, if you got any fear in you, take your assistant with you. And the next thing we read is, there's his assistant with him going into the camp. Gideon was a little scared. Sometimes God calls us to do something that scares us. There's some times whenever God's going to say, hey, I want you to up and do this thing. I want you to go to this place. I want you to talk to that person. And it's going to be a little scary. God goes with us in those situations. Even in the scary situations, God is with us. You think about, like Mary Beth's saying about God being our shepherd. Hey, sheep tend to be fearful animals. And whenever we read the 23rd Psalm, the shepherd leads them in places they don't want to go. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. It's not a fun place to be, but the shepherd leads them. So God may call you to go to a fearful place, to do a fearful thing amongst fearful people, but He will be with you. If He calls you, He will equip you. And so He says, Gideon, go down into the camp because I got something I want you to hear. I got something I want you to see because I've called you to a big task, and I just want to remind you I'm with you. I just want to remind you I got this. I know I whittled your army down to 300. It's okay. Watch this. It's going to be fun. Go down into the camp. And so we see there that he went down. He took his servant unto the outside of the armed men that were in the host. Verse 12, and the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude. And their camels were without number as the sand by the seaside for multitude. Imagine walking in. He's butterflies in his stomach, knees a little weak, he's shaking a little bit, his assistant's with them, and they're walking in. Maybe keeping their head down. They don't want to be recognized. Maybe they have a hood on or something. And they start walking in. And it's camels. And it's this, and it's that, and it's this. And when they finally reach to where the men are, who knows how long it took them to get there. But they finally get in to where the host, the armed men are. Verse 13, and when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow, and said, behold, I dreamed a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came unto a tent, and smote it that it fell, and overturned it that the tent lay along. Okay, so what's that all about? You can imagine Gideon just happens to be walking by. Just happens, because remember, God organized this. It didn't just happen. Gideon's walking by, and this guy's like, man, hey, did I tell you about the crazy dream I had last night? Within earshot of Gideon. He's like, yeah, it's crazy. This barley cake thing, and it rolled, and it destroyed my tent. It was the weirdest dream. Verse 14, and his fellow answered and said, oh man, I know what this is all about. Oh, I know exactly what that means. And he says, this is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel, for into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. What? This is the guy that was in a wine press a few days, weeks, whatever before, and now the Midianites saying, oh, we're in trouble. Gideon's coming. I had this dream. Oh man, I know what it is. That's Gideon. The Lord is on his side. That God of Israel is on the side of Gideon. We're in trouble. Hey, when God is on your side, nobody can stand up against you. When God is on your side, there's nothing that you can't do that He's called you to. When God is on your side and He has put a call in your life and you have surrendered and said, God, I'll do what you tell me to do, then you're going to get it done. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Doesn't mean everything's going to be smooth. But God will accomplish what He sets out to accomplish through you. And Gideon, he says, Gideon, I know 300 seems like it's not that many. And I know it seems tough. Just trust me. You've trusted me thus far. Keep trusting me here. I'll tell you, I'm going to give you a little something to encourage you. And he sends him into the camp. And as he's walking by, this guy just happens to be telling his dream. And the interpretation just happens to be, oh, that's Gideon. And so, of course, Gideon's response, that's right, that's me. I'm a mighty man of valor. I'm the one that's come to beat the Midianites. They're scared of me already. Good thing, right? Nah, verse 15. Verse 15, because remember, we said this is all about Gideon's dependence on God. Verse 15, and it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshiped. He didn't say, look at me. It says, and he worshiped and returned unto the host of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian. God places a call in your life. It may seem impossible. You may feel ill-equipped, but God places a call and He gives you what He says you need. You surrender and then He blesses. The response is not, look what I did. The response is, look what God did. Worship God. Gideon heard from them and he said, hey, they may think it's the sword of Gideon, but it's the sword of the Lord. And he worshiped because he knew it was his dependence on God. So no matter the odds you may face, trust God. No matter what may come up against you, trust God. Walk by faith and not by sight. If God has called you, God will deliver. God will accomplish His will when we surrender to it. And so we see God's directions for Gideon, Gideon's dependence on the Lord, and finally I want us to see God's deliverance of Israel. Now, 300. I said earlier, if you're going to have that small of an army, you better have the best equipment. Tanks, jets, rocket launchers, whatever is available. Like, they better have that. Well, let's see what happened. Verse 16. And he divided the 300. This is Gideon, divided the 300 men into 3 companies. And he put a trumpet in every man's hand. Okay. They're going to have something else, though. It's going to be something big. With empty pitchers. All right, what else, God? Because there's something coming, right? And lamps within the pitchers. So these 300 going up in an army without number are armed with trumpet, an empty pitcher, and then a lamp to put in that pitcher. Now these are not like code names for cool weapons. You know, these are not like, ooh, a trumpet. Yeah, this is this ballistic missile. It is so cool, man. The trumpet, because when it hits, it goes and it blows up. Yeah, that thing's awesome. No, that's not what it is. This is a trumpet. Yeah, that. It is a trumpet. A pitcher, just like a clay pot, and they put a lamp inside of it. 300 people, and they have trumpets, pitchers, and lamps. God, are you sure? He had already heard. He knew God had this. So verse 17, and he said unto them, look on me, and do likewise. And behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that as I do, so shall ye do. When I blow with the trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow ye the trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon and the 300 men that were with him came into the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch. And they had but newly set the watch, and they blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers and held the lamps in their left hand and the trumpets in their right hands to blow withal. And they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp. We'll stop there for a second. So get the picture. So you got 300 men, splits them up into 3 companies, so 100 men each. And they surround the camp. They surround the camp of the Midianites. So they're spaced out and they're all around them. It's dark. Nobody knows they're out there. And he says, when I blow my trumpet, everybody, all 300 of you, blow your trumpet, break the pitcher open, and then start yelling, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And so one trumpet, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been somewhere where there was a band playing and you heard there was a trumpet solo. I mean, those things can get loud, right? Now imagine 301 trumpets, because the 300 plus Gideon. 301 trumpets all blowing at the same time. 301 people yelling. And suddenly, where there was darkness all around you, now there's this noise and light. Now, you can't see past the first row. For all you know, there are row upon row upon row of people behind them. And that's exactly what the Midianites thought. This crazy plan, God says 300 people, trumpets, pitchers, and lamps. Go. And this plan that God had, there's no explanation for a victory if that's your plan, but God. And so they did exactly what God told them to do. Gideon led in exactly the manner that God told him to. And we see in verse 21, I stopped at the middle of it. They stood every man in his place round about the camp. When they blew, when they shouted, and when they let those lights shine, what happened? And all the host ran and cried and fled. All the host ran and cried and fled. And then they had their own theme song playing while they came in. I don't know. I'm just kidding. There was a song going over here. And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host, and the host fled. Listen, when they blew the trumpet, when the lights shine, and they started yelling, everybody inside the camp, the army without number, panicked. And it says, and they cried. I mean, can you imagine all these big soldiers, these tough guys, and saying like, oh no, it's true, he's coming. Gideon's here, we're in trouble. And they all start picking up their swords and running, which everyone knows you're not supposed to run with swords, knives, scissors, whatever. So they all pick up their swords and their spears and they start running. And then what happens? Oh, someone just moved. Oh wait, that was Bob from next door. My bad, Bob. Oh, sorry, Steve. Oh, and they start killing each other. They're fighting each other because they're panicking. This noise all around them. There's confusion. And so the Midianites start fighting each other. And remember, there's this they have allies. So I'm sure they probably look different. You had Midianites and Amalekites. You had different ones there. So it might be, they don't look like us. Fight them. That must be them. And they were fighting each other. And those who weren't defeated by themselves in the camp, they took off. We're not going to read the rest of it, but Gideon and his 300 said, oh look, there's some running. Let's go get them. Imagine 300 people taking out an army without number. How? God. Again, like I said earlier, if God calls you something big and has you use something small, it's so He can get the glory. Take out this army, and I'm not going to give you the equipment to use. I'm not going to give you enough people to use because you're going to get the victory, and it's all going to be because of me. And I want you to recognize it's all because of me. We look at the original 300. This outrageous story of deliverance that God worked on behalf of Israel. Impossible odds. When we read stories like this in the Bible, I don't want you to read it and say, well, that's cool, that's neat, that's nifty. Look what God used to do. The God of the Old Testament is the same God in the New Testament, is the same God today. You see, the power that God had to deliver the Midianites into the hands of 300 Israelites, His power has not diminished since then. We don't look and say, well, that's great, He could do that then. I sure wish He could do stuff like that now. I sure wish God had that kind of power today. I sure wish God could use me in some way today. God can. God can still work mightily in the lives of each and every one of His children. It doesn't mean that He's going to send you out against a literal army. But it might mean that He calls you to fight the good fight of faith and to be a witness and to be a testimony and to stand up in a wicked and evil day, to be counted for righteousness. It may be that He wants you to stand up and call out wrong when you see wrong and call out that which is right. It may be that He calls you to take a stand and be a witness and be different, even though it may mean that you get made fun of, even though it may mean that you lose your job, even though it may mean that you're ostracized. You stand up and you do what's right. Why? Because it's right. And God will take care of the results. And I'm just going to say real quick, that doesn't necessarily mean He takes care of it here. There's people that say, well, I've lived for God and I've done right and I'm still suffering. Well, this isn't the end. You're not done yet. You're not done until you're dead. Okay? Or He calls you home until He comes in the rapture and takes you. So if you're not dead, you're not done. So if you're saying, I'm still fighting the good fight and I don't feel like I'm winning, that's okay. You're not done with the fight. There's going to come a day when you are faithful on this earth, you'll stand before God and He'll say, now you're done. Well done, my good and faithful servant. And so whatever it is God has called you to, because He's called each of us to something. There is no child of God that He says, yeah, can't use you. There's not one. God wants to use each of us. He's called each of us. And so whatever it is He's called you to, regardless of how ill-equipped you may feel, He has equipped you so that He can get the glory whenever it's accomplished. So what is it for you? What is it that God has called you to do that you've been holding back? What is it that God has called you to do that you've been too scared of? What is it that God has called you to do that you're saying, I just don't know if you got the right person? God can do great things with each one of us when we just say, okay. Like, it doesn't have to be something fancy like, Dear Lord thy God, I have heard your cry from on high, and here I am, your humble servant. No, we just say, okay, God, if that's what you want, use me. And we will see great and mighty things done. The same God of the Old Testament is the God of the New Testament, is the same God today. He has the same power, and He's still using people to accomplish His will. Will you let Him use you? Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for this example in the life of Gideon and the life of Israel in the book of Judges, Lord, this example of how you can take something small and do something great and mighty in a way that only you can. There's no other explanation for their victory but God. Lord, may we be like Gideon. May we worship you, surrender to you regardless of how outrageous the odds may seem. May we give in to what you have for us. You have the same power today that you had then. You want to use your children in the same way you did then. You want to do mighty works and miracles, and you want to use us to accomplish those. Lord, I pray for the one here that's struggling right now. Maybe they're trying to live for you, but it just seems like everything's against them, and they don't know if they can keep going because they're not seeing any victories. Help them to recognize that it's not done. You haven't said, well done just yet. They may not see the complete victory here on this earth. Help them to keep going, keep being faithful, keep depending on you. Maybe there's someone here today that they feel like you might be calling them to something, but they're not sure. Help them recognize it's okay to ask you questions. It's okay to ask you if you're sure you want them to do that. But once they get that answer, help them to see how necessary it is for them to surrender. So Lord, I pray that you would have your will and way in all that's done for the remainder of this service and in each life here. Lord, I pray that each one here would come before you and surrender, willing to do whatever you've called them to, and then sit back and watch what you can do, even with one who feels ill-equipped to do whatever task you've called them to, Lord, because you can work mightily in their lives, and we thank you for it. If there's one here that's never accepted Jesus as their Savior, I realize today was not a gospel message, but Lord, your Spirit can speak to their heart, and just pray that you would show them their need for a Savior. In Jesus' name, amen.